This is Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of BC, brought to you by Sitka Gear. Come along as we bring conversations that matter to you into the high alpine. This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Yeti. Thank you, Sitka Gear and Yeti, for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems. We are back in the studio for another great episode of Talk is Sheep. We got Kyle Kamp, Valley to Peak, back on the podcast. We've been talking nutrition now for kind of doing it quarterly, like sub-quarterly. I think we're just a little under that, which is great. But we kind of had this vision of prepping to get us ready for sheep season or the fall hunts. And so timing's pretty much perfect on this one. So we're recording this July 13th. We're literally about 18, 19 days away from the sheep opener here in British Columbia and a lot of the Western states, certainly up here in Canada, for guys getting out in the mountains. And so now we're kind of looking at that transition as we get to those last few weeks, what we're thinking. And then the big key takeaway from this podcast is, what does it look like on the mountain? So what are you packing? How are you managing that? All that sort of good stuff. So totally stoked to have you back, brother. You're looking trim as ever, and we've got lots of great stuff to talk about. So
yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for having me back. It's been fun to kind of create this 4-part series that walks through the life of a sheep hunter, getting ready for a hunt, preparing, getting ready to go do the hunt, and then maybe we'll come back in the later parts of fall after everybody's hunts are over and talk about what to do in the off season.
Yeah, it's awesome. So it's interesting, like the hunt, like that's what everybody's so excited about, and me too, of course. But it's almost the other stuff that's like, that's the critical, and that's the part that makes you successful. It's the preseason training, getting the gear out, getting your archery gear out and shooting, or your rifle, and it's all those things that are going to make you successful. And then, but there's obviously the hunt's the big one, and this is the cool thing. Like I love about sheep hunting now. And in hunting in general, you can kind of live it year round, right? Like there's stuff on, TV you can watch, or you can, there's so much online content. There's YouTube videos at the Yin Yang. There's so many great courses, like podcasts like this, where there's just an endless amount of information that a guy like you can share about how to be successful on the mountain. It's funny too, it's the evolution of a sheep hunter. I remember when I was I kind of was a late onset, sheep hunter, not an adult onset hunter. I've hunted since the day I could. It was legal to, but I never really got into sheep hunting until my late 30s. And I was just talking to a buddy who was over, and he's like, "Shit, I just wish I figured out sheep hunting when I was young, like when I was 20. I started then." It was actually interesting. One of Greg Sawchuk, and he's an older gentleman, but he's super passionate, and he still goes out and does tons of stuff. I don't know how much sheep hunting he does now, but just does ton. He's a guy I want to emulate. And I look at him and I think, oh my God, this guy's had a whole life of hunting and he's amazing. But he actually has these regrets. I just figured out, I wish I would have done sheep hunting in my 20s. And I kind of the same. I was lucky. It was late 30s probably I got into it. And so a little late onset, but my perspective has changed so much. Like back in those days, you didn't know anything. So you're just and I was, just on the nutrition side and just the supplement side, and oh yeah, this pill is actually going to make me perform really well on the mountain, and just so myopic, right? But anyway, it's great having you on, learning so much, and really excited to dive into this stuff today. But have you done your death march yet?
No. The so that is supposed to be this weekend, the 18th, I believe it is when we're going to do it. There's been so many changes. I mean, guys have had so many obligations from when we first started ironing out the idea. So it's changed a lot, to be honest. It's semi a game time decision of what it's going to look like once we get there, but there still are a handful. I think there's about 16 guys still planning to show up on this coming Saturday. So we'll see what happens.
It's funny. You think, the death march, and it's you're out with your buddies and maybe having a couple pints and let's go do this death march. Yeah, fuck yeah, this is gonna be awesome. And then it's what do you do? I don't know, man.
yeah. You start doing. You're like, wait, we didn't know this was gonna be the case. No, this is. I think this is the 10th, 11th. I think this is the 12th year that it's been going, and a variety of different guys have been a part of that over the years, but it's always good to get together with that group and do something.
Yeah. So tell me, what does it look like this year? How far are you going, and what's the plan?
Yeah, this year was much more of an emphasis on elevation, less so on mileage. And Idaho, Colorado's known for their 14ers, right? Their 14,000 foot peaks. We don't have any that big here. Here in Idaho, we've got quite a few 12s though, and so the idea was to try to hit 6 or so of the biggest 12s here in Idaho, but to add some challenge to it, to link those together up high. Right, and so you're crossing some, bit of unknown territory and trying to forge your own way through some of this pretty honestly sheep-like, gnarly, scree type of country. So I think total mileage is pretty low compared. It might be the lowest we've ever had ironed out. I think it's 27 miles, but total vert, if I remember right, something like 16,000 or so over a couple of days, which is even that, we did last year was Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim to rim times 2, which ends up being potential of, I think 40,000 feet if you do all of them, how we had them ironed out over a couple of days. But so 16,000 doesn't seem like that much comparatively speaking, but the real challenge is just the nature of the country, just how rugged it is and shaly, and you're trying to piece together a good route that's, you're still going to come home. I think that this one probably has the highest risk of any of them that we've ever done, which adds a whole different, kind of a whole different feel to it.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you guys do any prep work? Like, obviously somebody picks a route. Like, I know Steve and Mark are really involved in this. I know you are too, but is it like a group effort to picking the route, and then are you zooming the guys? Okay, this is what you need. This is the gear you need. This is how technical it is. You're going to need ropes, or you're going to need crampons or whatever. Do you guys have those conversations, or it's just this is where we're going. Here's the route. Suck it up. Either you're there or you're not.
Yeah, you would think something titled "The Death Hike" would have a lot of planning and strategy going into it, but I think that was intentional on Steve's part, which is nice. Here's some of the details, commit and figure it out, right? And
nice.
That's part of what's changed this year so much is that Steve and Mark and the guys over at EXO are so focused on their product, right? They're just creating the best packs that they possibly can, and they've been so heavily invested in what will be the launch of K4X, which is just this ultralight backcountry pack, that they haven't been able to be as hands-on with this one. And so they kind of threw it in the hands of the collective, and a couple of guys came up with this route based off of some known times off of a website called the FKT, Fastest Known Times, which is a website where usually it's trail runners more so than any sort of a backpacker type of route will link together, write a small trip report, and report on their fastest times through a known segment. And this segment caught the eye of some of the guys in the group, and so they wanted to do it. But typically it's been, a route that Steve and Mark have kind of come up with over the past years, over the past death hikes. And, they sort of throw it out to the group, and anyone interested, you're welcome to join, but you usually don't find out anything until last minute. But they've been working on it, but they sort of keep it, look, you show up, be ready. It's going to be something difficult, and then we'll give you the details as you need them. But a couple of years ago, we did one in Alaska, and we had planned this really big loop up through the Chugach that was going to be, if I remember right, a little over 50 miles, lots of vert. But we climbed this first ridge, climbed a ton of vert to get to the top of this first ridge. There was kind of this hanging cornice over a ledge because it was early in the season and all the snow hadn't melted off, and you'd seen some footprints in it, but the idea of moving 20 plus guys through that didn't seem smart. So we had to sort of back down off of that. And we're in the, kind of in the middle of the Chugach trying to iron out another route to still make something out of this, because we're all up here in Alaska, and we ended up doing, I think it was 35 miles through some goat country. It was awesome. It was awesome.
You see goats?
We did. Yeah, we saw quite a few, actually.
That's awesome. Yeah, very cool. Well, awesome, dude. Well, I can't wait till I get back from my trip and get the lowdown on the death march. It's going to be fun to hear about it. So, yeah, totally stoked. So I'm 6 weeks out. I'm doing a fly out as we discussed pre pod here on the 29th of August. So, been getting some miles on the pack, and I've been following your words of wisdom, and I haven't quite got her all figured out yet. But today we're going to sort of do a bit of a deep dive on the hunt itself. So, what are what's your meal planning? What does it look like? And then sort of what are your strategies? And got lots of really cool questions in there. So, looking forward to picking your brain on that and coming up with some recommendations for me too. And actually, that's the one thing I haven't yet done is plan my meals. I do have a sort of meal plan. Just a curiosity. So when you plan when you were in your sheep hunt, what kind of, I guess it was a guided hunt. So guided is a bit weird, right? Because they've got stuff in camp. But like when you're on your own hunt, like what kind of weights are you carrying for meals? Like I've 1.5 to 2 pounds is sort of, and I know everyone's different. Like there's guys that need to crush 3,000 calories a day, and there's guys that live on 1,000 calories a day. But sort of what's your sort of median go-to in terms of if you had a pack for your whole day on a solo sheep hunt?
Yeah. So my sheep hunt, it was guided, but it was 100% backpack. So we didn't have a base camp, and we had to, the area that my guide, which was a good friend of mine, was interested in hunting, was fairly deep in there. So we hiked in about 20 miles to the area that we wanted to hunt. So we had to be pretty cognizant of 10 days of hunting, potentially mapped out 12, and taking all of our food in there. Now, I'm a bit unique in this because when you start hearing about backpack nutrition, it is pretty much fail proof that you're going to come across everyone focused on calories per ounce. And there's a couple of reasons for that, right? One of those is no one wants to carry a bunch of weight, but it also is under this idea of, well, when you have a high calorie per ounce, not only do you carry the lightest weight, you get the most calories. But in all reality, because of how the body operates, I'm not so much worried about calories, because the place we get our calories from, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, they all act very differently in how they fuel and recover us. Not all calories are created equal. So in that regard, to some degree, calories per ounce is a bit of a useless metric. And so I don't necessarily target a certain calorie per ounce or try to target certain number of calories per day or per bag of food. What I begin by is having a good understanding of what my total needs are for the day, both calories and those individual different macronutrients, and trying to get an idea of what those look like. Now, what I did do different on this sheep hunt versus, let's say, an elk hunt here in Idaho, for example, is you only have so much volume in a pack, right? So even if you don't think about weight, even if you said, look, I'll carry 500 pounds back here, you do have to think about how that's all going to pack up, because you can't just pack, big packages of bagels and all of this really high volume food. And so when I start to think about it from that standpoint, I do try to find a good mix of the total number of calories I need with good distribution among those different food categories, or what some people may be familiar with is a good distribution among those macros, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. It's a very indirect answer to a question that you asked.
So about 1.75.
It's more complicated. yeah, bingo. Yeah. It is generally more than that, because the intensity of a hunt, like we've talked about this in the past, your body there's this idea in backpack nutrition that your body is burning a certain type of fuel all of the time, be it fats or carbohydrates. Most people are familiar and recognize that you never want to be burning protein or muscle, right? So we'll sort of just leave that out as a mutual understanding among everybody. you're never just burning one fuel source, though. You're never just burning fats. You're never just burning carbohydrates. There's a pendulum that happens there. It's a very dynamic thing. There's always percentages of both that you're utilizing. And the general premise is that the more intense a hunt or any activity is, the more that pendulum favors carbohydrate intake, to the point of where an all-out sprint, for example, would be 100% carbohydrate. That's about the only time that you're burning 100% of any type of fuel source. So that's one of the main reasons I don't lean on calories per ounce and wind up at 1.75 pounds per food, or per day of food roughly, is because I want some carbohydrates in there, particularly on a sheep hunt where I know there's going to be periods of intensity and a lot of climbing. And one of the number one pitfalls that a lot of people will run into is they fail to recognize that muscle in your leg is a large reservoir, and that reservoir is draining when you're moving. And if you don't refill that reservoir, you're going to suffer the consequences, whether it's on that climb or by day 3 of all that climbing. You can think of it like we have this big mason jar that we put lemonade in when we have parties, which is like once every 10 years. And at the end of that has a little spigot, and the top is, a large opening. If I don't continue to fill that mason jar, but guests keep coming for lemonade, it's eventually going to run dry, and your muscle's the same. So you can buck the idea of wanting a lighter pack, but if that lighter pack is costing you the ability to recover and do as good on day 5 as you did on day 1, or maybe more importantly, do as good on day 9 as you did on day 1, because you wanted less food in a lighter pack, or you've packed so much fuel from the wrong source, then you're going to suffer the consequences. And so that's why I will think about packing logistics, volume in my pack, calories per ounce, total weight per day of food second, after I figure out my need, because I'm going to find a way to carry it, because that's it. I don't need 20,000 milliamp battery packs. I don't need a fancy fan to blow up my pad. I can leave weight out somehow. I need food. If I want to perform on day 10, there are things that I cannot bring with me to make up that weight and bring the fuel, because that's going to be a difference maker between me being successful and not. My fan that blows up my pad is nice, but it's not going to be a difference maker for me on day 9 of a 10-day hunt.
Yeah, well, you've really scratched into an area there that's there's a lot to unpack, and there's the logistical part of it, right? So there's the calories, right? Okay, you get in the breakdown of what you're burning and how you're burning it. But there are some challenges. And so it's interesting. Steve and Mark were up here from Exo Mount Gear for our expo, and they did a pack presentation, and they kind of were like, most people don't need these super big packs, these 8,000 cube packs or 8,000 80-liter packs or 100-liter packs. It's just like overkill. So like, but they're kind of thinking like your average 10-day hunt, and but in BC, like some of these guys are going in for 14 days. So at some point there's just like the logistics of it, trying to get all that crap in your pack. And like, I would say like most of us are pretty minimalistic. I know certainly I am. I don't have a lot of creature comforts. I take one sort of thing I shouldn't. I carry one of those tiny little pack chairs, the Helio. I used to use the A-Lite instead. Like they're about a pound and they're about this big. So technically probably the size of almost one meal in theory. But sometimes when I'm packing for 14 days, it's like it's tough to get everything in that bloody pack, right? So there's just like that aspect of it too. So lots to think about there in terms of like just physically trying to get everything in there. But okay, so you've got your plan. You're like, okay, I need X amount of calories. Like obviously you must run a calorie deficit when you're on your hunt. Do you not? Like I know what you're saying. Like you want that, but there's probably days on like where you're hiking in that you might burn 7,000 or 8,000 calories or like some like crazy number, and you're probably not carrying that kind of food with you. So talk a little bit about that balance, and like, do you have to heat? Like, we all know, and that's the weird thing about sheep hunting is like sometimes you're sitting on the mountain, like, the day in, the day out, or the 2 days out are going to be messy if you got a long hike in. And then on the mountain, it could be anything. It could be sitting and glassing for 5 days, or it could be like, shit, there's rams like a range over, and you spend 3 days busting your ass burning another 5,000 calories a day or whatever that number is. So talk a little bit about the logistical planning, and can you run a deficit on these hunts on certain days?
Yeah, I was just pulling up my actual spreadsheet from my sheep hunt. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Hold on, Kyle. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's great. And I'm with you on that same note, is that the worst thing you can do is, like, there's guys that go super, super skinny on food. They're like, and it's interesting. Kurt from Stone Glacier, he used to like throw some green belly bars in, and like so minimalistic on the food. You're just like, wow, man, like, super fit guy, obviously, but it's like, my hunting partners always said to me, he's like, I would rather carry a little bit extra weight to have the energy to go, or instead you bonk and you see the ram and then you can't get to it, right? It's like, what was the point of this, right? So
yeah, 100%. All right, so from the, to touch on the logistics question, the logistics topic, a lot of what I will do is I will make my own, right? So I will formulate my own things, my own food items to meet these demands that I've got. Now, that can sound really difficult. That can sound like, oh, that's easy for a guy like you, where this is his job, but it's far easier than it may sound like. The key is, and this is even true on day-to-day nutrition, is you're trying to find ingredients where you can isolate the nutrient that you need. So I'll give you an example. One thing that I lean heavily on is like a DIY breakfast granola that I'll make. And what I buy is, I'll buy some oats, I'll buy some granola at the local bulk bin. It's nothing special. It's your everyday over-the-counter granola. I'll buy some dried fruit like raisins. I'll buy some walnuts, almonds, things of that nature, and some protein powder. The walnuts, the almonds, the nuts, they have fat. The granola, the oats, they all have carbohydrates. The protein powder has protein. What that does is it gives me the ability to have control over the amounts and really tailor it to my personal needs. You can buy these commercial products, but you're left at the mercy of what's in the bag. That may be too much. That may be not enough. It may be sufficient in fats, but not enough carbohydrate. And so you're sort of left with, you're left with whatever, like I said, is at the mercy of the company that's designed that. So what I'll do is I will go buy these individual constituent ingredients, make my own, either put them in a Ziploc bag, nothing fancy at all, no Mylar, no shrink wrap, no all of the questions we get about, none of that stuff. A Ziploc generic bag, and I'll put it in there. Now, I have also gone the route of buying some Amazon vac seal bags and vac sealing this. It's 6 to 1, half dozen to another. I'd say, depending on your time, interest, and etc., would be what I would base that decision off of. So when you talk about logistics, yes, I do have to think about it. I can't bring big bags of bagels, like I said, for example. I can't bring food that's perishable. I still have to think about it. But a lot of what I'm doing is I'm making a couple of things to fill in the gaps from commercial food. So I still bring some food that I buy over the counter, but I bring something like this breakfast granola. There's a couple of like higher protein no bake bars, kind of is the best way to think of them. I'll bring a couple of those that'll fill in the gaps, but the rest of it's like trail mix that I buy, maybe a Snickers bar or two, a commercial freeze-dried meal, different electrolyte or supplemental powders that are predominantly just sugar and electrolytes. That's it. No other supplements beyond that. And so that helps fill in the gaps for what I actually need. Now, part of the question that you had asked was, am I running a big calorie deficit, burning 6,000, 7,000, whatever number of calories per day? Conceivably, that makes sense on paper, but what you often find is that that's not really what's happening, because you're often, there's days where you're glassing, you're not doing much. There's days where you get rained in, fogged in, you're in a tent for 3 days. And so if you're in a tent for 3 days, eating that amount of food, and then you've got a day where you're just going nuts trying to get across a drainage to get to a sheep, that's a big expenditure day. But the net of those two things is pretty equal. You're probably not operating in the deficit. So when you hear people come back from a big hunt, and they're like, oh, I dropped 8 pounds over 14 days. Well, a lot of that's glycogen and water. It's not always a massive deficit where you've dropped body fat. Well, I had to tighten my belt. That's because those glycogen and those water stores often dump, and you become much less bloated, right? Much less, you're holding a lot less water. There's less water retention. So the point of me saying all of that is, if you were running that big of a deficit, it would show up. You wouldn't be able to, on day 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, go across canyon, find a ram. So you do want to make sure that you're meeting some of those bare minimums.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot to take in there. And yeah, I'm reflecting too, like, yeah, okay, you've got a smaller amount, but you're sitting there doing nothing for 3 or 4 days. Obviously, you're building those stores back up and have that energy to go. Let's talk a little bit about that breakfast. You got me intrigued. So I've done this in the past. We've done it in the past. Built something like that. One of the things we've thrown in is condensed milk. Do you ever use anything like that for energy, or what's your take?
Coconut milk powder. So it's going to be potentially even, a little bit higher.
Right. So give me the ingredient. I'm going to the grocery store and like immediately after I'm kidding. But I'm inspired now, because this year I was thinking I had some freeze dried stuff, but like the only thing is the challenge I find is like 10 days of the same thing can get a little repetitive, but whatever. It's not the end of the world. Throw some different flavor in or something, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, that's what I like about the granola is I'll buy, 3 different types, and I'll have potentially, if I'm out there for 10 days, that's basically, 3 different breakfasts, and those granolas can take on different flavors, and the base for the most part is the same and doesn't interfere with those. So yeah, you could change it up, and you got to kind of be, have an honest conversation with yourself of, okay, well, I'm not at home. I'm not like meal prepping I'm just out here trying to survive and do well. And you do want to add some variety. You do want to like what's in your pack, right? There's nothing worse than you getting to day 6. You open up your Ziploc bag of food for the day and just look at it and stare at like, none of this excites me at all. So I think you do need to have some variety and stuff that you like in there, but it does give you the ability to add some variety. So here's kind of the recipe, and I think that you can add any kind of, like, there's a number of ways that you could add variety to this, which is nice, but this is the base for the most part. So there is a certain amount of coconut milk powder, a certain amount of peanut butter powder. Then you've got your granola, shredded coconut, quick oats, which is going to hydrate better than rolled oats and definitely better than steel cut oats. So you want quick cooking oats. Any kind of whey powder that you want, whey protein. I'm going to come back to a comment on that here in a second. And then any kind of nuts and dried fruit you want to throw in there. So I love walnuts, almonds, raisins, pumpkin seeds, just like a variety of stuff, but you could throw anything in there that you want. I got to caveat this with 2 things. One, I poached this off of Mark, so real credit needs to go to Mark. 2, we also have a couple of recipes that he and I both have used for our sheep hunts separately. We both created a couple of bars. Those recipes are both on our website. They're free. You can jump on there. Maybe we can link those in the show notes. 3, when you're shopping for a whey protein, you really want to look for an isolate. There are a lot of different names that get tapped into different protein sources, but an isolate's going to be a very good balance of a good nutrition profile, something that doesn't cost a lot, and something that still is going to mix well. On the other end of the spectrum, you have what they call a hydrolysate, which is very expensive. and it's a more broken down form of protein without necessarily being better for you. It's a very generalized phrasing, but I think that's a good kind of place to keep that. On the opposite end of the spectrum is a concentrate. And a concentrate is going to be more filler than actual protein. Generally, that filler is going to be higher carbs, higher fat, not actual protein per weight, per scoop. Right. And so if you ever look at the back of a protein product and it says anything about proprietary blend, or it lists its first ingredient as protein concentrate, you might think to yourself, there's better options out there and to keep looking.
So then when you're putting all this together, first of all, peanut butter powder, do you buy that at the grocery store? Is that a thing?
Yeah. Yeah. So the name brand is PB2, but they've got generic, like I buy the generic Walmart version. Now it's way cheaper and essentially the same nutrition profile, same taste.
Huh, okay. That's
but
news
basically
to me.
What it is basically is it's peanut butter that they've removed the fat from and then created a powder out of.
Very cool.
So that's good flavor.
Awesome. So then what is this? What are your portions? Like I'm not asking you for quarter cup, half a cup here, and I know it's personal to you, but how does a guy figure that out?
Well, I mean, it's honestly, we could figure out a way to host this too, and the guys could just look at it. But it's I have to give you portions.
Yeah, okay.
10 grams of coconut powder, 10 grams of peanut butter powder, 3/4 cup, or 80 grams of actual granola, 15 grams shredded coconut, a 1/3 cup or 25 grams of quick oats, 1 scoop of whey, and then, nuts and dried fruit to your liking.
And what was the protein powder? How much was that?
A scoop. Generally just one scoop, which is about 30 grams in most protein powders. You'll find some that'll, so these, going back to the naming of concentrates and proprietary blends, they'll usually say 2 scoops gets you to 30 grams of protein because they want to match protein for an isolate, right? Because if you go to the grocery and your average person sees a container with 30 grams with 1 scoop, and then the other container says, oh, this also has 30 grams, but you don't read the fine print to find out this takes 2 scoops. Those companies want you to think that you're looking at a 1-to-1 comparison when you're often not. You have to kind of look at those details.
Yeah, for sure. The deception of the modern marketing scheme when it comes to the food system. Yeah, I was talking to that with my son here this weekend, and just the games that are being played with processed food and how bad it really is. But anyway, that's for another day. Okay, so we talked a little bit about breakfast. So I'm under the carb assumption for the mountain. So what does it look like when you're building? So you got your breakfast, and then what are you planning for the rest of the day? You talked about having possibly a freeze-dried meal, commercial like Peak or something similar, for example. And then what else is you building around it?
And so, that would be the evening. And the rest of the day, I'm really trying to find these just snacking all day, right? Like these pockets of a few hundred calories here, a few hundred calories there. And I think another good tip is I might not eat my breakfast at quote unquote breakfast time, and I might not eat my dinner at quote unquote dinner time, right? It might be that we wake up, I eat like a granola bar or something, and we start hiking, maybe to the glassing knob, maybe to whatever else. And then once we get there to the knob, I might pull out the breakfast at 10:30 and eat it, or eat half of it and then half of it later. I might eat my evening meal during the evening glassing session and then have a snack right before bed rather than waiting until I get back to camp to boil water and eat that evening meal there. So you sort of break up the traditional timing of the way that people think about it. But I think that can help. And trying to, like I said, you're sort of eating throughout the course of the day, regular intervals to keep those fuel stores topped off, as opposed to these, traditional breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack type of timing. So what I eat during those times can vary from spicy, bag of spicy trail mix, some jerky or snack sticks, or let me pull up my spreadsheet here from my own hunt.
I love
spicy.
that you got a spreadsheet, brother. That's awesome. It's like, I know I'm not talking to a regular sheep hunter. Like I've known some guys that are pretty hardcore, but I don't think many guys have a spreadsheet for their nutrition. Yeah. I'll say that.
And those bars. So like I'll have things that, range from 300 to 400 calories that I might pull out at random points in the day, just kind of snacking on little things all day while having a bookended on there, a more substantial meal in the morning and a more substantial meal in the evening as well.
Let's just touch on the bar. So you said maybe a candy bar, have a Snickers, whatever, but then also protein. You have a single protein bar a day typically, or sometimes they vary. You have to carry some extra.
Well, I've gotten to the point now where I make my own, and again, the recipe is on the website. It's very basics, nothing complicated at all. Does not take a ton of time, anything. The reason I started doing that was most commercial bars are going to have more of their calories coming from fats and carbohydrates than actual protein. And most of those commercial bars, not all, but a vast majority of those bars are going to be very heavily marketed towards the low carb crowd. Now, there's nothing wrong with that beyond the fact that those usually have to have a lot of sugar alcohols and a lot of fiber added to them to keep that calorie and carb content down. And that will generally bother people's stomachs, right? And so if there's ever a time I didn't want something like that to bother my stomach, it's on a sheep hunt. So I've gone to making these bars that are, pretty basic ingredients, but again, I'll use some protein powder in there, and they're a pretty heavy calorie source. So 2 of these things are going to give you almost 600 calories and about 20 grams of protein. So, those alone are going to give you, number one, it's going to give you far more calories than a lot of typical protein bars. And then number 2, it's going to give you more calories from protein than a lot of typical bars. So I think that, like, if you hear about this breakfast I'm talking about, you hear about the protein bars that I'm talking about, someone is inevitably going to say, well, that's going to cost me some time. And so I think in this there's always an intersection of how important is it to you to be close to these numbers? Is that worth you giving your time? Or is that not that big of a deal and you just kind of want to load your pack and go and you're not worried about the details, right? So, for me personally, I just know what I operate the best under and what I need. And I found it to be these things to where, yeah, the minimal prep time that it costs me, the juice is worth the squeeze when I get out there. And I want to feel good. I want my stomach to be getting things that it's familiar with, not because I'm afraid of ingredients. My stomach simply does better with certain things, and I do better with certain things when I'm out on the mountain, and I want that to be the case. I want to enjoy the experience and feel like I've done everything I can to make the most of the time out there. And so, yeah, it takes me, a little bit, very minimal extra time for me to prepackage some of this, but that trade-off is worth it.
Awesome. Yeah. It's inspiring. And, I've done it a few times where I've made my own protein bars, I guess. And also the breakfast stuff, never dehydrated meals. I've never gone that far. But honestly, that some of my best tasting meals have been like the breakfast we've made and stuff. Again, my only sort of complaint was a lot of it's obviously granola / oats based, and it's kind of by the end of the hunt you're like, oh, okay, just one more day of this, and you've had it with just maybe even the texture, not even the flavor, because like you said, you mix it up too. One thing I think last couple of years we've gone to, I've been off the mountain for 2 years now, and it's embarrassing to talk about, but I think we did freeze dried fruit. I don't know, dehydrated versus freeze dried. Can you talk a little bit about that? Any benefits? Or I think we've been using you could get this freeze dried stuff and we're using that. Is there any benefit one over the other?
Yeah, so freeze dried is for the most part going to preserve more of the heat sensitive nutrients, right? I think that's a very good general rule of thumb. Like take vitamin C, for example. Vitamin C is a very heat sensitive nutrient. If it gets heated beyond a certain point for too long, which you need when you're dehydrating food, right? Dehydration generally uses heat and air. It's going to inevitably reduce, if not eliminate, some of those more heat sensitive nutrients. Whereas on the freeze dried end of things, because they use cooling to basically remove most of the water at really obviously cold temperatures, freeze drying, you preserve that, right? So that is one big key thing. Other than that, it really comes down to taste and texture preference. So for me, I don't really buy any freeze-dried commercial food, just frankly because it's expensive. So we dehydrate everything. I've not gone through the leaps and bounds of investing in a home freeze dryer, nor do I know that my wife would want me to take up the space for storing one of those. So we dehydrate everything, which I find to be, just work just great. Whenever you go back to actually add water on the mountain, if you let it sit long enough, you get the ratio to water right, then it turns out great.
Right on. Let's talk a little bit about on the mountain. Actually, maybe let's just back it up. So, for the guys that are a couple weeks out on their hunts and they're thinking about where they're going, what do they need to be thinking about for fueling over the next couple of weeks? Are they wanting to put on a few extra pounds, carry a little bit of extra weight into the field, or are they wanting to stick to their proper food regime? What do they do for carb loading, all that kind of stuff before the big hike in on the day?
That's such a good question. So I'm not an advocate of loading yourself so much that you intentionally put on weight, right? Because that weight at that point is just additional body fat, which is not going to necessarily serve any advantage. The premise generally in the minds of some people is, oh, well, that's additional fuel, that's additional weight that I could lose in the backcountry. But in reality, even the leanest guy has plenty of calories from stored body fat to still use, whether that's, normal body fat that you would think of, or body fat stored within the muscle itself, which does not mean that you're losing muscle. It means you're losing the body fat inside of the muscle as a fuel source. So I don't think that you need to intentionally load so much that you put on weight prior to going to a hunt, even though I understand where some people might use that logic. What I would do as you start getting ready to go is I would be intentional about my eating, meaning I would be sure that I'm eating regularly. I would be sure that I'm getting a good mix of the 3 different nutrients: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And I would not reduce my eating even though my exercise taper has begun, even though my volume of training has gone down. And so what you wind up with when that happens and you do it right is, as your exercise volume goes down and your nutrition stays the same, you inevitably fill those nutrition stores that are needed prior to going into the hunt. And that eliminates the need for these big carbs, right? These big carb loads before an event. We used to think that was the way to do it, right? Was that there were really 2 different protocols. One was you just give someone a big high carb meal the day before they go and they should be going. Well, we know that that's not necessarily the case. They kind of need to load for longer than that if they're really going to maximize their nutrition stores out. And then we thought there was this protocol where you needed to get someone to drain their carb stores by giving them vigorous exercise with low carb diet, and then replenish that by eliminating or reducing exercise and loading them full of carbs. And that was typically thought to be done over a 2-week period of time. And we found that what happened for people is they would begin their event, whether it's a hunt, whether it's a marathon or whatever, feeling very bloated, or the word that was most used was fluffy. They just felt really not good, which is not what you want before any big event. And so the balance that we've struck and sort of recommended since then is, if you can get a person to taper off their exercise, generally most plans are going to taper you 2 weeks out, and you get them to continue to eat decent, baseline meals, their normal calorie intake. They're not reducing it or overloading it. You begin to get a natural restoration of those nutrition stores, right? Because you've essentially shut off that lemonade spigot, right? From the metaphor that we used earlier, but you're still adding to it. That allows that jar to get completely full before you actually go on the hunt itself.
So no more carb loading per se.
No more carb loading. No more stuffing yourself to the gills under the guise that it's going to give you better performance. But I bet you feel a lot better before you get ready to go.
It's funny watching, my wife races or did a lot for a while and a little less now, and the kids and everyone the night before, they're like this big plate of pasta. It's like this. But, okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit. Okay, now you're on the hunt. So I guess a big part is like ahead of time, like hydration's a big deal, and like making sure you're going in, like obviously well fueled, which you just discussed, but also really well hydrated. Anything there like on that side you recommend in terms of electrolytes or anything like that before the day before?
Well, I think especially on these early hunts, right? I mean, it still is generally pretty hot. Some places are still really, really humid that time of year. So talking about hydration and electrolytes on the hunt itself is probably good. If you're talking about prior to going into the hunt, there used to be this, idea that you could do what we call hyperhydrate, which is just essentially overload yourself with water prior to going in, under the premise that that's going to carry you throughout the duration of your time in the backcountry. We sort of got wise over the years and realized your body really maintains a very strict control through kidneys and lungs as to how much water you can hold. So you can certainly stuff yourself to the gills full of water, but your body's going to regulate that through a hormonal response by getting rid of the excess. And so you'll just be peeing a lot. And so we realized, okay, well, you can't really make a person hyperhydrate, but you certainly could encourage them to hydrate prior to. And I think this is particularly relevant for guys who are flying, because you get on an airplane, you're traveling, etc., and you just forget to drink. It's harder to remember, harder access. You're not, you don't just have a faucet in the other room. So you just want to be sure to remember that you are getting sufficient hydration before you actually go. On the hunt itself, it's difficult because you're at the mercy of your water source. So you could be up high where there's no water or very minimal, and you're kind of at the mercy of whatever it is that you've decided to haul up to the top. If you're at a place where if you're endless water, you're next to a spring that seems to be flowing pretty good, or you're next to a river or a glacial melt or whatever, then you want to be sure that you stay on top of your hydration. I think electrolytes are beneficial, but they are overhyped. No question about that. They are beneficial in the sense that if you are sweating a lot and losing a lot of sodium through your sweat, then you need it to be replaced. But you got to remember that the food you're eating also constitutes part of that makeup. So this idea of you needing, packages with multiple thousands of milligrams of sodium in it through the day just to maintain what we call equal balance. Let's just use that term. Equal balance between your sodium and your water is simply untrue, right? So while I think it's important to bring some, I certainly wouldn't be overly emphatic, as it seems to have grown accustomed to being lately, largely due to the great marketing by companies that sell these products, to where I'm just drinking, really, really large amounts of this stuff. And I don't necessarily need them, because food makes up part of it too, like I said.
So what would you typically throw in, like a noon tablet a day or something, or 2 a day, or an emergency, or what would you throw in your pack?
I think it depends on the conditions. It depends on what we're planning. But for the most part, I'm typically bringing 1 serving of electrolytes per day. And that could range from Tailwind, which has 300 milligrams of sodium per serving, to a liquid IV, which has 500. Element has 1,000. So there's a variety of different products available. But if I'm going to be on an early season hunt and conditions look like they're going to be really, really warm. A great example was my sheep hunt, right? If I was doing that in early August, hiking in 20 plus miles, gaining a significant amount of vert, I'm probably going to bring more than just one serving of electrolytes in to get in there. Because you're dealing with multiple things. You have the amount of sodium that you're losing through your sweat that you're trying to replace. You're losing fuel out of your muscles because your body's using carbohydrate. You're sweating, so you're losing water, and you're really trying to restore all of those to maintain good performance and feel strong all the way to the end point that you're trying to hit. The beautiful part about this is if you plan it right, they all support each other. What I mean by that is some of these mixes contain both carbohydrates and sodium, right? And so when you have that, when you have a carbohydrate source, it helps take in the sodium, which helps us retain more water, which prevents dehydration, which prevents cramps, which helps us perform better. So, a lot of it depends on the scenario that you're looking at, the temperatures you're expecting, and I know that it's a very discouraging thing to hear someone like me on these podcasts say, like, you don't need that much. Oh, but sometimes you need a lot. And to know, well, where do I fall? And I would say that it depends on you, right? If you've tried something and you feel great, that's exactly what you should do, even if it's the opposite of what I'm telling you should do. But I also wouldn't fall prey to the marketing schemes of you need all these supplements, and you're planning on a fairly mild hunt with mild temperatures, lots of glassing days. Maybe it's a tough hike in, but after that, you don't have a lot planned. I'd bring one per day as a supplement, because again, when you look at my food list, there's a lot of salt in that too, and sodium is sodium. So if you're getting it replaced, it's getting replaced.
Yeah, awesome. Let's talk a little bit about hunt strategy. We've kind of discussed this now, like with the supplement, but talk a little bit about sort of meal planning for your day, and like, how do you maintain that consistency? Like, thinking about your breakfast and your meals, and so just a little bit of strategy on the mountain, what you need to think about in terms of how you're eating it. I know, again, to your point, it's going to depend on the circumstance. If you're going to go and glass, if you're going to glass from camp, it's different than if you're going to hike for 4 hours, like before the sun comes up, right? So lots of different variables there. But generally, what do you need to be thinking about in terms of meal management and, more importantly, energy management on the mountain?
I think one of the most important things, and a lot of people do this, so this might seem elementary to some, but is taking the entire day and separating them out into gallon Ziplocs, right? Because if you just sort of take the totality of what you're planning to eat on the hunt, you put it in your backpack, you risk either trying to be too conservative and not fueling yourself well enough, or you risk being overly aggressive and you're 5 days in and out of food when you plan to be there for 7 days. And so the beauty of having everything consolidated into baggies, either an individual serving size itself in your gallon bag, right? Like this breakfast, for example, and then putting those into, separate gallon bags really ensures that you never run out. The other thing I would say is that when I'm moving, particularly when I'm moving, hiking quite a bit, I really want to be taking something in every couple of hours at a bare minimum. If it's more intense, then I might lower that down to every 60 minutes. Now, I'm not stopping and eating full meals during this time. It could be a single Nature Valley honey and oat bar, 100 calories, handful of gummy bears, handful of dried fruit, couple dried mangoes. But I want something coming in frequently when I'm moving to replace the stores that it is that I'm using, right? And then aside from that, I'm kind of just, planning logistics out around the hunt. Like my breakfast and my dinners for the most part are sort of timed by virtue of my day. When we get to Glassing Knob, when we get back to camp, those are sort of staples in there. And then in between there, just every couple of hours or as my appetite dictates, that's when I'm going to eat. Now, I would say the greatest variable that's going to change for all of us in this recommendation is how much we're moving midday. If I'm moving midday, I'm going to eat more frequently. If we're moving less so, then I kind of have just prerogative to do whatever it is that I want.
Talk a little bit about the individual that has. So I'm the same as you. I do a 1 gallon Ziploc bag. All my stuff goes in there. I've got 12 or 14 or 10 or whatever, however long the trip is. And it's like they're pretty consistent. I might put a little bit extra on day one, knowing that I got to hike in or something like that. And I may have a luxury. I might have some. I think what I do is I'll take like some desserts, like freeze dried desserts, and I'll have them like every 3 or 4 days for some extra calories and like kind of a treat or whatever. But I have everything sort of portioned out. Now I went on a trip a couple of years ago. It's been a decade, and it was a new guy, and he was overexerted. He was freaked out on the mountain, and we were counseling him and stuff. There's a couple things that happened. First of all, he wore a Camelback hydration pack, so I never knew how much he's drinking. Like we assumed he was drinking as much as everybody else, and we always had like the 1 gallon Nalgene. It's like, okay, it's very. I've drank half a liter, or half a gallon, whatever the case may be. Oh, I've drank 2 of those. Okay, so I'm well hydrated. Well, this guy wasn't drinking. We had no idea, so dehydrated. And then on top of it, he was like, he just wasn't eating. He just was like, he's kind of a picky eater anyway. Like never ate much. We hang out with him. He was never the guy that would finish the steak or whatever. Anyway, so we're on the mountain and just he'd be like, yeah, I got some food left. Do you want it? I'm like, shit, yeah. Like we're just like, taking, but kind of saying you need to eat. But he was like, I'm going to throw it away because I can't eat it. Right. So anyway, long story short, he got severe dehydration. He had to get airlifted out. Like they actually sent a chopper in and freaking airlifted him out. It was a really crazy experience to have a guy like that. But it was all like, and we didn't know it at the time, but lack of deep water. He was severely dehydrated. And then on top of it, he wasn't fueling at all. And anyway, it cost him dearly. He lost the hunt. And the crazy thing is, airlifted him out, went into the hospital. They put an IV in him, got the electrolytes in him. And within an hour, he was like, bang. It was like night and day. But we actually had to go to the outfitter and say, this guy's in trouble. We were on I think we used a sat phone or something with emergency medical service, and they couldn't come in that night because it was dark and it was a mountain. So they couldn't get in there. And they're like, okay, we'll be in there first thing in the morning. They were airlifted him out. He sat in the outfitter's cabin with all kinds of heat on him. And long story short, he just wasn't eating. So what do you do to a person that maybe, and it's happened to the best of us, where you haven't tried your food, maybe the freeze-dried stuff isn't really working for you, maybe you got the breakfast thing going on, the protein powder's too hard in your tummy, and then you've got all this exertion and you're just not eating. Like, what are some of the tips and tricks, and how dangerous is it not to be fueled on the mountain?
No, I mean, it's extremely dangerous, right? I mean, the stories that you shared that are not uncommon are scary. How many of those there are. The tips and the tricks are, number one, this is going to seem very obvious, but to plan ahead of time so that doesn't happen. I have found that a lot of times when that happens, it's because no one really took this part of it serious. They just kind of threw some stuff in. They wanted to go really lightweight. They went too lightweight. Variety of different reasons, right? Or they're just not paying attention to it. They've underestimated. They're trying a new diet. I've seen that a lot. When keto and carnivore was really popular, you had a lot of people falling flat on trying to do that on a really high exertional hunt. So there's a variety of things there, and the tip and the trick to not let that happen is you don't let that happen because you take it serious and you plan. Right. That's number one. Number two is if you find yourself in that position, whether it's you or someone else, I carry little packets of individual honey, because sometimes this will present itself and the person just like simply isn't with it enough to communicate, and you often can't get them to eat. But with honey, you can take that open, you can squeeze it in their cheek. Carbohydrate metabolism begins in the mouth, not in the gut, which makes it a unique feature. And oftentimes you can get that to give them enough fuel to come to where they can start to eat. So if you recognize that in someone and they can't communicate, you've got something there that can at least bring them to and get you guys out and, back to safety. So yeah, I think the number one rule there to prevent it from happening is to do your work ahead of time and ensure it doesn't happen. Know what your needs are, know how to fuel yourself, know what those different distributions among those nutrients are, and plan to take care of yourself. Be an asset instead of a liability when you're with those people.
Geez, that's very interesting about the honey. I've never heard that before. So you're just like little packets that you get at the restaurant that you put on your bread. Like that's the stuff that you would take with you, for example?
Yeah, you could use that. They sell them in sticks too that almost look like a pixie stick.
Yeah.
And you can crack the end of it and basically squeeze that into the corner of their cheek. And oftentimes that'll be enough. You might need a couple of them, but oftentimes getting some of that into them will at least bring them to enough to where you can get them to eat and then get off.
What do you do? That's awesome. That right there is worth the cost of admission. That little tip, but that's a good one.
Good.
So what do you do for somebody that's bonking? Like somebody that's like they thought they're prepped or whatever, but for whatever reason, and I think like I've been there where it was just like, oh my God, like I'm just done. Is there any trips, or when you bonk on the mountain, is it over? You just shut it down and like
you need to stop. Right. So first of all, that's the number one problem that a lot of people will face is they want to keep going and try to make up for it while they're moving. You can't. You need to stop. And that alone paints the picture why it's important to stay on top of your nutrition throughout the entirety of your hunt. Because if you don't stop long enough to eat, you're eventually going to be brought to the point where you have to. And the recovery from that is a long time. So I wouldn't say that you're screwed. You need to come off the mountain, but you are going to take a fairly significant time to come back to, because when you eat, it takes time for that fuel to go from food that you've eaten into actual fuel that your body's using, right? We forget that, this bar that we have eaten that tastes great at some point becomes usable jet fuel, right? I mean, there's a literal conversion that happens inside of us. The speed in which that happens is not quick, right? So here's a great point to insert. Well, why not eat a bunch of fat? Why not, go for calories per ounce? You get so many more calories, per, and you get to keep your pack so light. Because the point from the dietary fuel, not stored body fat, dietary fat, getting converted into usable fuel is a very, very, very long process. Right? Hours from the point that it gets converted from the food that you eat into usable fuel where you now regain some sense of cognitive ability to be able to continue to hunt is a very long time. If you find yourself bonking because you haven't stayed on top of your fuel, that period of time from food consumption into actual fuel is very short with quick carbohydrates like honey, for example, dried fruit, gummies, electrolyte powders that have carbohydrates in them, certain bars. There's a variety of things that you could use in there. But if you find yourself bonking, you want to give yourself a dose of 30 to 60 grams and give yourself a period of 30 minutes or so to regain feeling good. Right. That 30 to 60 grams is, it's a wide range, but it's essentially a dose heavy enough to do something without you feeling like you're just having to eat half of your food bag, to come to either. Because it's going to, like I said, it's going to take time. So where some people will go wrong is they'll just eat. It's not working. Eat. It's going to take time. So if you give yourself a measured dose, 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates, give yourself, it'll probably take 15 minutes, but 15 to 20, 30 minutes to see how you feel after that. If you still don't feel good, give yourself another 15 to 30 gram dose. See if you feel better. And then once you start feeling better, you can decide what you want to do.
Okay. In terms of, just talk a little bit about energy, what am I trying to think? Like energy snacks or whatever, like you get like gummies or whether it be goo or whatever. What's kind of your take on, like, do you carry that kind of stuff, or are you always looking for like more whole type foods that you're using? What do you use for energy supplements basically?
Yeah, I absolutely take that type of stuff for this exact reason. I mean, if we're great example is my sheep hunt, right? There was a band of sheep, a couple of good rams in it, and the moving from camp to get over to them was no short task, right? And they're because you're on a time crunch, it's not like I'm gonna say, oh hey, oh hold on guys, I need a snack. Right? I mean, you're making the move. And when that's happening, I'm able to keep some of that stuff in the pocket of my hip belt and pull it out while I'm moving and eating. Right. So I keep stuff like that for when I'm climbing, when I'm active, when I'm moving, because the point, again, from consumption to digestion to fuel is very, very short. Not something I want every day when I'm sitting in my office. I don't need that stuff, but it certainly has a case use on the mountain. And what you take is entirely up to you, right? You can take any variety of different seemingly kids snack, like fruit chews or gummy bears or Sour Patch Kids, or you could use dried fruit, or you could use a liquid beverage like I said, like a carbohydrate based electrolyte drink like Tailwind or Gatorade. Even I've had people use Tang, your common grocery store bought cheap childhood Tang, to instant mashed potatoes. That's one of my personal favorites. I really like those a lot because sometimes I just get tired of eating sweet stuff. But the point is that, or yeah, you could use the commercial goo packets too. The point is that you want something that has very little processing time, right? So we talked earlier about the differences between the protein names: whey protein isolate, whey protein hydrolysate, whey protein concentrate, and the composition of those things, and what percentage of those are fillers versus actual proteins. These fast processing carbohydrates versus the slow complex carbohydrates, I picture them sort of acting like this chain link, right? If you think of a long chain and those are made of individual links, when you eat a complex carbohydrate, you're essentially eating the entire chain. And as your body needs a piece of fuel, it's going to break one link off, but leave the rest of the chain. Break a link off, leave the rest of the chain. Need more fuel? Break a link off, leave the rest of the chain. Until 3 to 4 hours, that chain dwindles down to nothing. It's a slow digesting carbohydrate. Where these gummies, or insert whatever else fast processing carbohydrate you want here, play an impact is you're essentially getting the chain link. It's like, oh, you need it now, here's a link. You don't need to wait for this whole thing to process and break down. We're just giving you links to use right now. And when that's happening in the presence of an active muscle, it's like wadded up newspaper into an inferno. It just torches it, right? And it's great in the right moments.
So you have no preference in terms of your goal. You do, but it's not necessarily what everyone else needs. It's personal preference.
It needs to be a simple carbohydrate, right? So
right, yeah.
It needs to be one of those fast processing carbohydrates. So I wouldn't eat a big bowl of brown rice, for example. That's complex carbohydrate. But I would want something that is relatively made up of those simple carbs. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, we've kind of talked about the hunt prep during the hunt. Now, maybe you've taken an animal, you're back at camp, and like you're making your way back to civilization, and then you're getting back home. So like, I guess you're kind of constrained with what you got there. You probably don't need to be crushing everything that you got if you're not going back out in the mountain. Maybe you don't need your goo in camp on day 10, day 9 of day 10, when the full plane's coming to get you tomorrow. But what is like, is there any hydration stuff you need to be thinking about, just sort of like in terms of overall health, and then that transition of getting back into civilization? You come off the mountain now, and interesting for me, I've got 2 hunts planned this year. So I've got my stone sheep hunt. I'm going to fly in end of August, 2 weeks, come home, and then about a month later, I've got a Roosevelt elk hunt. So got a planning. So it's round 2. Obviously, hell of a lot less physically challenging as the sheep hunt, but still could be a pretty challenging hunt depending on circumstances. So sort of what do you do post hunt or sort of on your way when you're on your way back to civilization?
Yeah, I think that. So I think that there's kind of two ways to think of this, because you know, depending, there might be people in here who want to hunt sheep but still don't, and maybe they're elk hunters, right? Where they're weekend bombing, coming home recovering, weekend bombing, coming home recovering. So you have that, but I think the biggest factor to consider is the time between your hunts that you have planned. So for that person who's hunting quite a bit, they come home for a week and then they plan to go back out, and that's kind of their fall where they're just running and gunning all the time. You want to, number one, you want to be sure that when you're home, you're in recovery mode, right? Getting good, solid meals, equal distribution through your day. In other words, you're not eating little bitty things during the day and having a massive dinner, but you've got these great sources of nutrition that your body can always pull from. Because when you're in recovery mode, your body is like I picture like a great metaphor would be a well, and it's always going to that well to make withdrawals at random points during the day. And anytime you're lacking nutrition, it's going to an empty well, and we're missing the opportunity for growth and recovery. So you want good distribution of fuel through the course of the day so that you have the opportunity to recover well. And you don't want to murder yourself with training, right? At that point, you're, hay is in the barn. Like, you're not going to get anything in a given week. At that point, it becomes focus on recovery so that you can survive the duration of the season. Now, if you go to the guy who's got a month in between his hunts, kind of like you were describing, the same is still very true on the nutrition front. You want to make sure that you get solid restoration of and from the hunt that you just returned from. But at some point, between that month, you might want to insert some training, right? So you don't necessarily lose or fall back. I think that it can become maintenance training, not necessarily progressive or improvement training. Like I said, there is no, 4 weeks, you're not going to be able to do anything really meaningful that's going to make a difference in that hunt. But to be able to maintain what it is that you've worked for, let's say 10 days, 14 days after you get home from the hunt, depending on how tore up you are, leading into the next one could be good.
Yeah, awesome. Really good stuff. So we've kind of talked about pre, during, post, and that was kind of our goal today. What other stuff are we not touching on, Kyle, that I've missed so far? What else do we need to?
I think that we've hit a vast majority of what someone would want to pay attention to as far as planning. We have, we have a Backcountry nutrition planner where you plug in your weight, and then there are multipliers that we've come up with based off of what a person anticipates the intensity of their hunt being. And that will tell them what their calorie needs are. That will tell them what their protein needs are. It'll sort of lay out for them what their needs are for the hunt. And then it will give you the opportunity to plan 5 days out. And as you start to put in what food you're going to plan, it will generate a grocery list for you. There's a couple of example tabs in there too. So maybe we'll link that in the show notes and give guys a code to get a discount on that. It's only $10 out of the gate anyway, but I don't want to promote something just to go make money. I want it to be helpful. So maybe we'll get some discount codes for folks at the podcast that want to check that out. And the reason I say that and I insert that there is this: we've really not given anyone, how many calories should I be eating based on the hunt? How many grams of carbohydrates should I base? How many grams, blah, blah, blah. And that's because it's a very large range, and there's several different variables that you've got to consider based off of your weight. Are you above your weight? Because if you're above the weight that you want to be at, then I would plan that off of my ideal weight. I don't need 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 calories because I'm at 245, when in reality I feel better at 200. I'm trying to fuel the muscle, not all of me. So I think it's more difficult than it might seem to just say, okay, everyone needs to go target 13 calories per pound of body weight, and that's what you should eat on a sheep hunt, because it depends on the intensity, it depends on the body weight, it depends on quite a few different factors. And so that's essentially why we created that sheet, because you get all those questions answered in one spot.
That's great, because that is exactly what I was you talked about all this stuff philosophically, and I tried to corner you down with your 1.75 pounds per day. You wouldn't give me that, and that's fair. Or you wouldn't give me the 13, whatever it was per pound. How much was it? 13 ounces per pound? No, 13.
Give you the what was it?
You were just giving me an example of so much per
13
pound.
calories per pound. Yeah. 13
calories.
I mean,
yeah,
I
calories
pulled
per
that
pound.
out of the air, but yeah.
Yeah. So you wouldn't give me that actual number. So, but that was my thing. It's like, okay, now I'm going to my first sheep hunt, or I'm going to go do my first hunt, and I need to know how many, like what to build. Like, how do I do that? So that's really helpful, knowing that you guys have that planner. I'm actually going to go check that out. I'm really keen on that protein bar recipe too. I'm going to check that out. And depending how challenging it is to make it, I'm planning to use that for my hunt, but 100%. So yeah, I love that. We'll get that code, and get that website and get everybody over there to get some, get the data that they need. Cause I think, yeah, that's an important thing, is trying to figure out, like we kind of just had a range like that 1.5 to 2 pounds. And quite often, and it was sort of like, we've done several sheep hunts, right? Like I'm not experienced at all. I'm not trying to say that, but I've gone out on a sheep hunt and I'm like, shit, I'm really hungry. I need more food, or I didn't need that much food. So I kind of know what I needed at the time. And it worked for me, and it happened to work out to 1.8 pounds per day is what was in my thing. Right. So,
yeah. And I think that's important too, is if there are things that you have found to work for you and they violate everything that I've said, you should do what works for you. I mean, that ultimately is what you're solving for. So yeah, that's important.
Awesome. Well, so just anyone that's doesn't want to look at the show notes, we will get all that. But where do they go to? What's the website? What do they need to do to sort of get some data on this?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, which is v2pnutrition.com, and the 2 is the number 2, under the top, there's a heading with different resources, and you'll find the Backcountry Nutrition Planner. There's also a course. So we have a couple of self-guided courses to help people better understand nutrition. There's a Backcountry Nutrition course too. It's 5 parts. Each module is between 5 and 7 minutes or so, but it walks you through how to set up your nutrition plan too, and covers hydration and electrolytes. So that'd be another option for people who, maybe just want to learn more. And that is listed under the same website, v2pnutrition.com, under the resources tab.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's a lot of great stuff there. Like there's a plethora of information, and really helpful. So yeah, I'm going to check it out, and yeah, and let you know. I'll let you know how it goes. So yeah,
please do. And you, or really anyone, if you have questions, that we love interacting with people. We really enjoy just chatting with people. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be more than happy to help you the best I can.
Awesome. Well, Kyle, thank you so much. Look forward to hearing on your death march. Do you post all that stuff? I know the Exo crew does. Do you post that stuff up on your personal page there?
Usually, getting a little philosophical on me now, because I used to, and then I don't know. I started feeling like, man, this just kind of takes away from the intention. I just kind of want to, I try to share great nutrition information just to be helpful to people, but I started just having this feeling of like, it sort of removes the accomplishment by going and talking about the accomplishment for me. And so I've opted to just let the accomplishment of some of that stuff just be what it is and live in my head. But I'm sure we'll be able to find something about it afterwards somewhere.
Yeah. Well, it's super cool because it's such a huge accomplishment. So there is sort of this celebration by a lot of people, probably some jealousy too, if we're going to be frank, of others, but like to achieve what you guys do and to do there. And yeah, I have to say lately, I've been sort of anti-social, social media, I guess, if you will. I probably shouldn't be, but it's pretty all consuming. Like when we work in the communication space doing stuff for, whatever, there's a lot just on the day job, just trying to get the information out there that you need to get out there for the brand. And then to do it personally, it's like, oh, wow. Okay. It feels like work. So there's so many great things about, social media. But again, for me, I just, when it really started was with my sheep hunt.
I felt like that was so special that it just it just almost felt like it was exploiting something that should just remain really cool in my own head and with my guide and my friends. And I kind of talked about it a little bit, but certainly not everything. And since then, it was kind of like I like that. So
yeah,
hopefully it's not
awesome.
a disappointment.
No, for sure. I'm with you, man. It's a very personal thing, a very private thing, and it should be celebrated the way you want it to be. It's your sheep hunt, nobody else's. So yeah, that's awesome, brother. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. And I don't think we'll chat again before I go up my hunt, but we'll circle back.
And good luck. I'm excited for you. I can't wait to hear about it.
Yeah, it should be good. So looking forward to coming back with some stories and look forward to checking your recipes out. I'm going to look at that, and if it's not too complicated, if a neophyte like me can figure it out, I'm probably going to check it out. Obviously, I think the key takeaway for somebody that's like maybe listening, there's lots of people that are very experienced on the mountain, but like every single thing that you put in your mouth, you should have tried ahead of time in sort of a similar type of environment. You can't necessarily replicate your sheep hunt, but at least, go on a training hike and try that food or whatever. And like, okay, maybe you're okay with peak refuel and you've tried 3 of their meals, but don't go and try something different on the mountain that you haven't tried. If you got the luxury of it, certainly not a protein bar that you've never tried before, because man, if your body reacts to it, you don't want to find out when you're 30 miles in the backcountry. So,
yeah, 100%. Good takeaway.
Awesome, brother. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing about your trip here shortly.
Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate you having me. It's been fun to do and get to know you more and support the crew that listens to this.
Appreciate it.